And good evening. I'd like to welcome you to yet another edition of the Columbus Report. I'm Jason Griskorik, your host, and very fortunate to have with me Representative Deaver sitting here in the hot seat. Representative Deaver, glad you could join us.
How are you? Good to see you again.
I'm glad that you were able to join us.
Of course.
It's been a while.
It has been, but I always enjoy coming over here. It's great having a conversation with you.
It's a good time to come back. We're ending summer vacation.
We are.
I'm sure you and the family enjoyed your time here in Ohio.
We did. Well, one of them went away to camp, which was great. Mom and Dad got a little bit of a break. The other fellow was here, but the youngest had a little one-on-one time for the summer, which was wonderful for him.
Probably something the little one doesn't get as much now.
Not nearly as much, and when you're the youngest, correct.
Indeed. So obviously we need to catch up on what's been going on, and a couple things have been passed by the governor that you've been working on. Let's just crack down into it.
Sure, great. So it's been a real busy cycle. Obviously we did the budget. We talked about that in one of our prior meetings of the things that we got done for the district, the school funding formula. The governor unfortunately vetoed some of the language that I put back in. And we're still working through that, obviously.
Any reason why? I mean,
It's just, it's this particular governor. He has a certain view on how districts like Winton Woods and the Forest Park area, but also Sycamore and Princeton should receive funds. He says, well, since you have businesses here, you must be rich. And that's his philosophy. And I always encourage the governor to come visit some of these neighborhoods and some of these communities and realize that they're hardworking blue-collar folks. But by no means are they extremely wealthy, and we do have a need here to educate our kids. We've got a lot of diversity here, which is wonderful.
Absolutely.
But you look at Princeton, we've got 40 languages. 40 languages where the kids don't speak a word of English. They speak a different language, 40 different languages in that school system, and most of them are illiterate in their own native language. So you have these teachers that are taking these children on. They're illiterate in their native language, so you've got to figure out how to communicate with these kids, number one.
Correct.
And number two, get them literate in their own language. Then teach them English and get them literate in English. So that's a unique challenge, and we've got 40 different origins coming to this particular district. 40 different languages creates 40 different challenges. The resources the school needs to meet those challenges are tremendous. But remember, we've got 15,000 political refugees that are here. They're here legally,
Correct.
They are here for political asylum purposes, and they've decided to locate in this district, which is great. I love the unique challenges that brings, but the diversity and the fun that the kids get to have by meeting kids from all over the world is a wonderful thing. But it does provide unique challenges for the school system to administer that and deal with it. So part of that is funding. You've got to have enough funding to make sure that the teachers are there, the folks that can speak those languages are there and available to not only educate them and get them up to speed in their own language, but then we've got to translate them into English and get them prepared to graduate.
And that's where I was kind of wondering, the teacher is the most critical and crucial crux to this whole unique challenge.
Yes, indeed.
Because, again, you're talking language barrier on both ends. You're talking teaching differentiation, and you got to amalgamate that all into one curriculum.
That's right.
That is just amazing in itself. I can't do that on my own schedule, let alone how a teacher can do that. So to almost, I don't want to say it's a slap in the face, but it's almost a disregard to what that, especially our districts here, do.
I think the big challenge that we have fundamentally when it comes to this is that we've never really peeled back the original layer, which we need to do, which is looking at property tax, how we tax homes, why we tax them, and what taxes on residences should mean, or even property should mean. We haven't done that deep dive. I think there are some states that have some modeling for us, like Florida and California, that have ways where you can capture property tax in a reasonable, responsible way without forcing people out of their homes. I mean, one of the big problems that I always have is locally, as a prime example, we've increased county spending by, $50 million in the last year, but we don't know what for, and then now the taxpayers are being asked to supplement it. We hear a lot about that there's a lack of resources coming from the state, but I can tell you that's not the case. This is a spending problem at the local level, but then that creates unique challenges. So as we're looking forward and we're saying, how are we going to deal with property tax? How are we going to look at restructuring our school funding formula with a new administration? Because I think we will have that conversation now. We already have a new speaker. We'll probably get a new one in just January, who has said we want to tackle this issue. This is going to be a priority of his speakership. So if that's really the case, then I'm going to have a seat at the table actually redrawing and redesigning it. And part of that is as we're trying to fund local sources, local projects, and our schools. One of the things we can't do is kick out grandma and grandpa from their house by making it unaffordable anymore. And so we've got bigger pieces that we have to splice into that too, as we make sure that our kids have the resources they need to be fully educated and capable and ready to meet the workforce, but also make sure that the folks that are living in the district aren't adversely impacted where it makes them move out because they can't afford to age in place. So I think those are some balancing things that we still are working through, and that's something that I'm looking forward to doing if the voters will have me back.
Well, which begs the question. You're starting to allude to that question. When we see January, obviously we don't know what the crystal ball is going to bring us come November to January. But do you honestly feel, regardless of if you win the seat in November or not, do you really see that a very, maybe not a large upheaval, but at least a shift, a different shift when we see January?
Well, by default, there's going to be a different shift.
Sure.
A third. A third of the General Assembly will be new people by default because of term limits by default, and that doesn't take into consideration the other variables. We're going to have a new governor, so that's happened. That's happening.
There's no around that.
We're going to have a new governor no matter what. We're going to have new people in the statewide offices. So it's going to be a different environment. The only thing that's going to stay about the same is the Senate. So I think that's the crux of it, is when you have some new ideas, especially in the governor's mansion, you get a new changeover, a new breath of fresh air, in the leadership of the House, then it allows us to make a difference. The former speaker and the governor were aligned on how they viewed school funding. If it weren't for the fact that I have a great district and wonderful people to work with that are on school boards, that are superintendents, I put out the call. I said, hey, treasurers, school boards, I need you guys to come to Columbus. I need you to talk about this stuff. I need you to state your case. And the ones that showed up really did a wonderful job. You think about it, though. I mean, that first budget we did, we talked about. I mean, we got it all back, 100% and some. Places like Winton Woods saw huge increases. I mean, they started off at about $15 million in state funding. They're at 20 now. So a massive increase annually for them over the last couple of years. Princeton was largely held harmless. We've made some adjustments there to help them out, and because it's about net dollars on the table. So we made some tweaks to the funding formula and also found ways of replacing those revenues. So I think we've done a really good job based on what's possible, right? Everything's about the art of the possible.
Correct.
So I think we made giant strides in that regard. So I'm looking forward to that conversation again. But we've gotten a lot done since then. So I know that was your original question. So
correct.
I know that begs the question.
No, we're very free flow when it comes to a lot of these questions and where things go. But obviously, we're seeing change again, and I think that's a bright and, as you said, a breath of fresh air. Do you believe that is in the last 2 years because of the last 2 years that we're seeing this change, or is that just a crux that we've been using because it's easy to say?
I think it's easy to say. Really, change only happens because people are pushing it and pushing the edges, pushing for something different, wanting to change. I mean, the hard part about all things in life is focusing on how to get something done. I mean, in our own personal lives, I kind of joke a little bit, is that, when we're married or we have partners or whatever and we're living with people, we end up defaulting to certain tasks in our household, right?
So true.
We just do. I mean, I always laugh. I said, before I met my wife and got married, I always did everything for myself. I cooked, I cleaned, did everything for myself. And now that we both have jobs, we're both working, we have 2 kids, I've got 2 jobs now because I travel back and forth to Columbus. We have kind of broken up the duties of the household, right? And the funny part is, like, when she goes away or when I go away, those parts of those duties somehow just don't get done because they'll get to it when they get back, right? And so we just by default are that way as human beings, right? Unless we have to do it for ourselves, we typically will wait, right? Or let someone else do it. It's just a fair analogy, I think, of just the way we are, just human beings are. So part of that, too, is that when things are just kind of plodding along in our government or they're plodding along in our society, as long as you're not being asked to change to do something, you're fine with the status quo or you're fine. But the minute you're asked to do something, then that's when conversations start because it changes your day-to-day routine. And so part of my challenge and my job as a legislator is challenging the day-to-day routines of folks and getting them re-engaged in those processes and rethinking what they're doing, why they're doing it, how to make it better, more efficient, and more effective. At the end of the day, there's only so many dollars on the table, and so we have to be responsible with it. So, when we're looking at schools, we've done that. I mean, we went in, we did charter school reform. Today, you're seeing what those laws did because it's in the papers.
Right.
We're seeing it. Those laws went in, and that was not easy to do, to get people to change the way they were looking at that type of reform in education. But we got it done, we made it law, and 12 months, 14 months later, we're seeing the positive impact of that.
Right.
And it's bringing light and shining a light on something that needed to be, needed to be exposed. So I think I'm really happy with that result. We're moving that in the right direction. But then again, we've gotten a lot of other stuff done too this year. I mean, we got the appraisal management companies bill done, which was extremely important from my perspective. Whether you're in Forest Park or lower income area or even a high income area, everybody remembers TARP and the bailouts and the crash of the economy a decade ago. One of the problems we had was that there were folks that weren't licensed who were doing appraisals on properties and inflating values to get money from banks, and a lot of the money came from the federal government.
Before you go any further on that, how did we allow that to happen? I mean, how did someone unaccredited, and normally we look at these things and we look for the accreditation or things, finding so that if something were to happen, you can go back to them. And here there are people that had no accreditation and have a job leading people into what unfortunately led to some very bad situations.
Indeed. So one of the things we've talked about for the last 3 years, I think it seems like it's been longer, but it really hasn't. I mean, this has been a 3-year journey to try to fix a lot of this stuff. They didn't have license requirements for appraisers. They didn't have licenses. There's not a license requirement for an inspector either right now. So you could set up a home inspection company tomorrow and go to work. Even without any experience or knowledge of any of the construction trades or building or HVAC, anything, right?
And that's amazing because we put so much faith and trust into people who,
correct.
This is what I need to go to my next step for anything to do with my home or anything to do with my life.
Correct.
And here is just average me. Please don't hire me to do this.
Well, that's absolutely right. So part of what we did originally was we wanted to really tackle the foreclosure piece because there was a lot of vacancy and abandonment and blight. We wanted to make sure that was done. I mean, one of the things that's really cool about it is I was just meeting with a bunch of realtors, and we were at an all-time low for short sales in the state, and it's because of the reform that we did. So I said, I'm sorry if I put a couple of you guys out of business. They said, no, it's okay because now we're selling houses for full value. And so they're happy that they don't have that problem because it was very tough. It's hard on neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. It takes away tax revenue from the local governments because the values of the properties are suppressed. So we fixed that, and it's working, and it's great. So these are the last two pieces. So the appraisal management is done. That was my bill. The other one is the inspectors, which I'm a co-sponsor of, working through the committee process. So it's out of the House. It's in the Senate. We're hoping that we get that done at the end of the year. But the reality of it is we didn't have these folks licensed. I mean, realtors are licensed.
Correct.
The mortgage brokers are licensed.
Yes.
Banks have license to issue loans. The lawyers are licensed. The title companies are licensed. And the thing is, when you have a license, you have to have insurance. And so insurance provides a remedy for when things go wrong, of course.
Correct.
So lawyers have insurance, realtors have insurance, title insurance agents have insurance. Everybody in the transaction is licensed with insurance with the exception of those two. So the appraisers are now licensed.
Okay.
So they have to be licensed under Ohio law now. And the last piece is the inspectors. So we're getting that taken care of. So in my view, if we're going to have a healthy economy in Ohio, our real estate and our finances have to be solid and flexible so that everybody has an access to capital. Mm-hmm. And when you get to the point in your life when you're ready and capable and prepared to purchase a home, mm-hmm. That you can rest assured that the folks that are there are licensed and are there to do the right thing and not to find a way to benefit themselves financially. And so if they make a mistake, then there's remedies and redresses for Ohio consumers, which is a wonderful thing. Puts balance back in the equation.
Again, going to the idea of responsibility, making sure that those are held accountable for what they're supposed to be doing.
Correct.
You've been going, and we've talked a few things that are very locally centric, mm-hmm. Statewide, but very definitely touching on that local area. The local governments have always been that key to making things move here in the state. Do you feel that we're going to find those local governments finally getting, I mean, they have their footings, and granted they've had their setbacks for a while, but do you think we're going to start getting even higher, maybe not to the pinnacle that where we were when the fall hit many years ago at this point, but a few years ago for most of us. Do you feel that we're going to start to see that upswing even further?
I think we've seen, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
Sure.
we've seen the recovery. I mean, the recovery's occurred, and the economy in the last 18 months has been wonderful. I mean, we've got record unemployment nationally, but we're doing real well in Ohio too. We've got, when we were looking at a potential budget shortfall, not only did we do what was responsible for the state of Ohio and do a balanced budget, but we took into consideration where there might be shortfalls, and we've governed in a way that everything that needed to be funded is funded. The people that need it the most are taken care of. We put another $170 million in the opioid epidemic. We've doubled the amount of beds in the county, but we did it by finding waste and inefficiencies in the system and
we've
getting
talked
rid of
about
bad
those as well.
programs that just aren't working and consolidating the efforts. So I think the big challenge that we have moving forward is because we have finite resources, we can do one of two things. We can either find efficiencies and effectiveness and be a little bit business-like in that regard. I mean, we're still a government, so we have to have a heart to a certain extent, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of people that need it most, right?
Absolutely.
But we also have to make sure that people aren't abusing the generosity of the system, and that does happen occasionally. It's very rare, fortunately, but when we find it, we find great savings because they do exist. We're looking at $140 billion of state budget, and it's a lot of money. And when you have $1 billion that seesaw up and down, it sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme, it's very small. It's
Right.
It's less than 1%. So, but it does impact various areas tremendously when it impacts them. So I think the real key moving forward is we've done such a wonderful job in the last 8 to 10 years as a state. The policies that are in place right now are allowing for economic growth, economic expansion, the introduction of new businesses. You can see locally, we finally are getting some of those contracts closed and getting our
Yes.
roads repaired. Those are things that take a long, long time. People think that you can get elected and do it in a day, and it doesn't work that way. I sit on the Transportation Improvement District Board, and constantly we're trying to find money to do a feasibility study, so that way then you can take the feasibility study into a plan, and then take the plan into an EPA checkoff, and then get the EPA folks to say you're ready to go, and then you got to put it out for an RFP, and then so it goes on and on and on, and these processes take time. But in the last couple of years, the amount of money we've been able to put back into local governments, specifically like Deer Park and Reading and Sharonville and Evendale, et cetera, to get them that seed money to start those projects and start working on things that haven't been touched since, I like to say, the first Star Wars came out, which is true.
I was just going to say, we've talked about that, and that's one of the highlights I'd like to go back to and see where we are today, but continue,
Sure,
please.
and so those seed monies now are allowing us to allow the local governments to realize their project dreams. But a lot of this is, I have to be a tour guide too. I have to find the grants and help folks. I mean, I'll give you a prime example. In Glendale, I can't tell you for how long they've been trying to do something about the train noise that goes through
I was
Glendale.
going to say, the train is probably the biggest contention. Everybody loves going to Glendale, but it's always the train.
Right,
Exactly.
but it's not the train. Everybody loves the trains. The people who live there love the trains, but it's the noise because they did not have the proper barricades to those little things that go down.
Correct,
Right,
correct.
the crosses that go down to make sure that cars can't traverse the tracks.
Right.
And until they have that entire area resolved, they couldn't. They have to sound their horns, and those horns are going 24 hours a day. There's a lot of trains running through there at all times, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, all day long. And so what they needed was some help with some money.
Okay.
And I mean, quite frankly, it's kind of amazing that it's been so long of trying to get help and nothing materialized. So we went out, we found a grant for them. I wrote a request. I sent them a letter. We got the city council involved, got the new mayor involved, got the old mayor involved, and made sure that I worked hard to get on the railroad commission. So now I sit on the railroad commission in the legislature. Got on the railroad commission, and now they've got their seed money, so they've got their $750,000, and they're going to make that a quiet zone now.
Excellent.
So now you can go and enjoy the trains, but they don't have to sound their sirens anymore. So the best of both worlds, but $750,000 is what it took. The local community couldn't raise it, but what they were able to do was do their share, so you have to have a match from the locals. So
Right.
once we were able to get them to work towards that, they met that goal, raised their own money. And then I was able to get the big funding to get that to work. But part of that is you have to work with CSX, and you got to get the railroad company itself
Correct.
to buy in. You've got to get
Yeah.
the railroad commission to buy in. And the upside too is our OKI director is now the chairman of the commission, so it made it very, very seamless from the standpoint of everybody knew the issue, knew what was going on, and then bringing CSX to the table and then finding that grant money and put it all together. So a lot of people came together to make it work, but again, it has to be a collective partnership to do it.
Was it something more in the fact that everybody's wanted this for so long, but either no one was listening or the options weren't there at the time, or a little bit of both?
I personally think that it's just work. So it's a lot of work. I always laugh that, this job is a huge pay cut for me, it's really true. But I'm doing it because I was frustrated as just a regular citizen living in the district, that for all these years we always said, why isn't this getting done? Why isn't this getting done? Why are we having troubles with this and this and this? And so I started looking into it more and more. And as a lawyer, when I went to Columbus, I said, you know what, I'm going to put myself out of business in the area of law that I do, which I have. It's kind of ironic, but I've done it. And that area of law is no longer even remotely profitable. No one comes in anymore for that area of law because we resolve the issues. We fix the statutes, and now people can do it for themselves, and they don't need me.
But wasn't that something you wanted to do anyway?
Absolutely, but because it's the right thing to do, right? And then so I started looking at I went to every one of the city council meetings and talked to and sat down privately with the mayors and the council members and said, what are you really trying to accomplish? What do you need? And the chiefs of police and the firemen, and they had been saying, well, we've been asking for this for years. We need help. We don't know what to do. And normally people say, well, I'll look into it, but they don't hear anything back. So Justin and I, who was in my office, we made it our mission to find out what they needed, how to get it done, who to talk to, and we would put it together. And it became a full-time job. So because when I'm at home, instead of being in my law office, I'm actually meeting with constituents and meeting with these officials to make sure that I know exactly what it is that they need and deliver it. I like to say Deaver delivers, not because I have a pizza company, but because I really try to want to deliver on the policies that the people need for the district.
Goes back to really what you've always ran on, is being with the people that you are wanting to help.
Correct. Right. Well, I mean, look, the way I look at it is there's no such thing as a Republican issue. There's no such thing as a Democratic issue. There's no such thing as an independent issue. They're just issues that people have.
Sure.
Now, there might be approaches that might be Republican or Democrat or independent, but the issue is the issue. And to ignore an issue because of where it comes from, because of what neighborhood it is, or what their affiliation is, to me doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. But there are better ways, I would say, of doing things. Sometimes you can build a better mousetrap, sometimes you can't. And so that's the challenge, is when is knowing when you can and when you can't. But also you have to address every issue that comes your way, because that's your job. And so it doesn't matter where the issue comes from. I try to be responsive when people ask questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll find it and we'll get it to them. We'll point them in the right direction. Sometimes they call me and they need Winstrip or Shabbat or Portman or Brown, right?
Yeah.
So I'll point them that way. And sometimes I get calls from Portman or Brown's office or Shabbat or Winstrip's office, and they need something from my office at the State House. So, or maybe it's a county issue or a local issue, and those folks just don't know where to turn. So a lot of times it's being a tour guide and helping them find the right place to have their issues resolved.
But it also sounds the way government should be running. Everybody helping each other in some form or fashion. Again, you saying you're being a tour guide, but you're also leading charges. You're also taking the initiative and maybe guiding someone another way. Maybe you not being the head, but at least you being the mother hen and starting it off and letting it flourish.
Well, I appreciate the analogy, but I don't know. I look at it like this. It's we have a representative republic, right? So my job is to make the best decision that I can based on the shared values of the district. But I also have to keep in mind the state of Ohio has a global thing that if it fails, it hurts us too, right? So it's a balance. But when we're talking about the appraisal management, that's something that affects everybody all over the state. But it also heavily impacted some of our hardest hit neighborhoods. The vacancy and abandonment piece, it hurts neighborhoods. There's just no tax revenue coming in there. It suppresses valuations. When you have a suppressed valuation, it hurts our schools, it hurts our libraries, it hurts our seniors, because they count on these revenues and to fund the programs that are there. Now, when it comes to renewal of levies, we can always have a conversation about how it's being efficient or effective, but we can't argue about the needs that are out there. The needs are real, and so I think that's kind of the challenge that we have. But I mean, we're looking, from whether to do something complicated like that, or whether we're honoring Sonny Kim, who was shot and killed literally right down the hill from my house. I mean, as the crow flies a couple hundred yards,
Wow.
quarter mile maybe on the road because I have to take a little windy path. But I was there that morning on my back porch, and I heard the gunfire. And I heard the gunfire the night before. And he was a neat guy, gave a lot to the community, and so Bridget Kelly and I worked together to honor him. So we have a stretch of a highway now, 71 from Dana Avenue all the way up to Kenwood Mall, named after him. So the signs are going to be going up shortly, and a fitting tribute to him. So we get to do some things like that are unique because it's honoring a fallen hero. And what ended up really happening with that bill was great is that there was a lot of members from across the state that said, hey, I had a colonel or a corporal or a sergeant or a police officer who died in line of duty. So the bill became this, this huge bill honoring our fallen heroes, not only in the military, but in our first responders. And so it was really kind of neat to be a part of that and to watch communities across the state have their loved ones and their heroes honored appropriately.
Again, joining together as one, because we're used to hearing this great divide, and the no one can speak against the aisles, and that's one thing that I think we've always talked about, that you've always found a means to get across that aisle.
Yeah.
Again, as you just said, there's no Democratic, no Republic, no independent thought. It's just the thought that's there. And how do you rectify it?
Yeah, and I try to run all my bills, so everything that I try to do, I always do it in a way where I unite as many people as I can in the General Assembly. I mean, I like it when I get a perfect score and get unanimous votes on stuff. But I try my very best to bring people in so they understand the issue, understand the approach. I think over the years you've kind of learned my approach, which is I'm looking at things that need to be systemically and structurally fixed so we can fix them and move on. And there are issues that I have great relationships across the aisle, and I said, there's some issues we're just not going to get along with. And I said, and that's fine, but we don't need to do those.
Right.
And they say, that's great, I don't want to do those. And I said, well, neither do I, so we're in good shape. So let's do the bread and butter things that we need to do, our roads, our bridges, our make sure our education's there. Let's take care of our seniors, our disabled. Speaking of which, the ABLE Act, we've talked about that a lot.
I was just going to say.
So we just had an update on that, and I can't tell you how happy I am with, so I sit on the ABLE board, and so the Treasurer's Office manages it, and the ABLE board kind of advises and consents, and we have meetings quarterly on how the accounts are growing and what's going on. And we just had our recent report. So 12 states have joined ours. So we have the largest amount of funds in the United States in our state's account, managing it for our disability community, not only for Ohio, but across the country. 12 different states. We are almost at a point where the disabled in our state won't have to pay any fees or anything. Like, imagine if you could get your retirement account has no basis points, right? Imagine that. So so we're seeing a record number of folks opening accounts. Money is going in there astronomically. We actually we're very, very fortunate that the United States Congress passed the Able to Work program. So now if you have a disability, because we were first in the nation, your loved one who has a disability can now go get a job and put their paycheck in their Able account, and it doesn't count against their benefits. So if you're a parent who's been waiting your entire life for your child who has a disability, and you were devastated because your child had to live a life of poverty, abject poverty, now they don't have to. So they can work, be a part of the community, they can get the medical benefits that they still need, and at the end of the day, it saves taxpayers a ton of money, because these folks, they have a lot of value, and they a lot of times get overlooked because of their disability.
Correct. It's usually the first thing, obviously, the first thing that people see, and most of the time, unfortunately, is the first thing that they get marked off on. Like,
I understand.
And we're moving on. But to see that we're actually taking that blinder off and moving forward in a very progressive way is amazing.
Well, I mean, think about it. You can, the reason why I was really pushing for this when I got in the legislature originally was, I have a cousin who has an intellectual disability, And I had a great story that I gave on the floor, and I used to go on Sundays to Five Guys with my kids at this specific location. We've shifted to a different place, but they always wanted to go to Five Guys, and I have to say I can't do that every Sunday anymore.
No, I
but
think we all shouldn't.
It gets on the belly a little bit, but
Yes.
they liked Five Guys, so we would go there, and there was this wonderful kid who worked there, and he was deaf and mute and had a disability, but his job was to kind of take care of the place and clean up, take the garbage out, and that's what he could do. And man, that place was, I mean, you could eat off the floor. He was meticulous.
And he took pride in it,
and he took great pride in it, and everybody liked him, and he always smiled, he was happy, and people would come for him. I mean, I have to admit, I kind of did too, because I knew when I would go there, it was immaculate. I mean, the place was run well, and he took very, very good care of the place. The restrooms were always perfect. The floors were, I mean, this kid was incredible. But about 10 months into his work there, he was no longer there. And I asked the manager, I said, what happened? He said, well, he's making too much money. He lost his transportation. Right. So here you have a kid with multiple disabilities who takes great pride in his work, who's making the employer proud and doing a great job for that employer, and the employer rewarded him with a pay increase. And because of that pay increase, because he was doing such a good job, he lost his transportation and his benefits. And so when I got to the General Assembly, I said, this is not acceptable and this is not right. And there has to be a balance. And so we did. We created a nice little balance in the account. And so once their savings get over $100,000, then we phase them out completely when they get to that point. Because that's fine. They have enough money to take care of bills. But when it goes back down, then they get phased back in. Now they can work. Now they can make sure that they have the medicine that they need. They can have housing if they want it. They can have their transportation if they need it. And they can go to work if they want to. And so it saves taxpayers a lot of money, but it puts pride back into the disability community.
Absolutely.
So that they're productive, that they can be the best at what they can be for what they can do, and it allows employers to hire them without fear of losing them. So we've got a great win there. So these accounts are taking off. Our state is situated, I think a couple other states might fold into ours because our program is working so well. It's just wonderful to see it happen, and we've got all these kids now that have a future that they never otherwise would have had. And so it's a nice compromise, right? We have the issue, so we had a choice. We could either let government do all of it, which was failing our kids.
Right.
And so the idea was, well, why don't we let them empower their own selves and empower their own lives and be out in the community, be a part of the community, share their uniqueness with all of us and share their work ethic with the rest of us. And it's worked well. It's been great. And there is so much great pride in work, and putting people to work and letting them be who they want to be it's been a wonderful thing. So if I do nothing else as a legislator, I mean, I can retire happy with that.
Absolutely. I think that is a perfect, I wouldn't call it a capstone because I don't want to say that because I know there are great things to come, but this is one of those absolute, warm and fuzzy moments, so to speak, but it will definitely live on and continuing. You are watching the Columbus Report here on Waycross Community Media. I'm sitting here with Representative Jonathan Deaver, and we are discussing some great things that are going on within the state of Ohio. Continuing on with the ABLE Act, one of the things that obviously it is doing is obviously empowering, but in many means it is also erasing, as I said, that mask, getting rid of the, dare I say the word, discrimination against these people who are willing to work, who want to work and have an identity.
Right.
Obviously, these are ideals that you were looking for. Has this piece of legislation wanted you to tackle something else in that regards to help another individual cause or anywhere else?
It's a good question. So one of the other bills that we've talked about was human trafficking.
Yes.
And so perfect segue for you. I don't think you planned it, but that's great.
Don't tell anybody.
It's fair enough. So as you remember, we had the human trafficking bill introduced my first term.
Yes.
We fell short at lame duck. We couldn't get it through the finish line. There were some arguments. The lawyers were arguing over the technicalities of expungements when it came to certain types of offenses. At this term, we introduced it right in the first half of the year. Again, we got into that debate. I am happy to say, though, that we did get it done. We used the Senate bill as the vehicle, so it is now law. So what this bill does is if you are a victim of human trafficking, meaning that you find yourself victimized by these predators under no fault of your own, or you're in it. I mean, this is an abusive, modern-day slavery kind of environment.
It is.
It is an absolute horrible thing. I think if anybody spends a few minutes researching it, you would be aghast at how prolific it is and how systemic it is, even right here in Cincinnati, in the Cincinnati region. It's amazing. So one of the things that struck me as particularly odd is that if you're victimized, you're being drugged into this typically as a teenager, as a young adult, you're picking up charges. You're getting a solicitation charge. Sometimes these folks, these pimps, are making you do things, stealing. They get you addicted to drugs. A lot of these folks are addicted to heroin, or they put them on those drugs.
And there's your control right there.
And there's your control, and they do it for a couple of reasons, because most people would never do that. They would never, ever act that way or do that kind of work, but for that kind of drug control or physical control that these folks are under.
It's usually the first thing that most people say. I never expected my son or my daughter to do this. That's not the type of person they are. And there's
That's right.
It starts small and then it increases. And you're right. It's horrific to even start to. No horror novel can be read as to what we're seeing in our society.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was, once you get yourself out, because there's a lot of people when they're in it and they get picked up, they are afraid. They're afraid for their own life. They're afraid for the lives of their family. If they have children, they're definitely afraid for the lives of their children. Sure. And so getting them out is a tough challenge. So occasionally they want out, and they're willing to say they want out. Or they get themselves clean and sober, and they realize what they were doing, and they want out. But the problem is you've got all these criminal charges, right? And so how do you get a job?
Correct.
How do you apply to college?
Right.
It becomes a big challenge. So what we decided to do was to make it possible that if you've gotten out, right, and you're clean and sober, and you've done whatever the judge needed you to do, that you can now apply to have it wiped out from your record. Right?
Perfect.
So
yes.
you have to go to a hearing on every single one of your charges independently. Each charge, you have to demonstrate that you were under duress and that you were victimized for human trafficking, and then the judge can make a fact pattern decision, case by case, charge by charge, to completely wipe it out from your history. So we had a great lady who came up and testified in committee, and she got out, got clean, because part of it she was addicted to some serious narcotics during the process. Her pimp had forced these things on her right out of the gate. He took her, abducted her, got her hooked on these drugs, and then she didn't know what to do. She got out. She was in her mid-20s, got clean and sober. She got busted for a long enough stretch by a judge that she could get away from him for long enough.
I was going to say, it's probably enough to remove the clutches, so to speak, and be able to be at least an individual, not associated with
or a piece of property.
Correct.
Right. And so she was able to get her footing underneath her. She was very fortunate to get some good people in the system that was able to help her. And so she ended up going to college, grad school, graduate school. Right?
Amazing.
Yeah. She's 30 years old, unemployable.
Good point. Yeah, because of
but she's got a doctorate, unemployable, because of that. So. And part of her challenge is she's been going back to the courts and asking for the expungements. And win some, lose some, but the ones where she'd lose, the judges say, well, there's really no clear statutory authority for me to do this. Sorry. And so when these charges land with a judge, that's the judge you got to deal with until that judge is gone and the next judge comes in. But it's in that courtroom. If it's in courtroom 315 as an example, it's in courtroom 315, no matter who the judge is, for the rest of eternity. So you have to, and most of the time, our judges are there for quite a long time, 6 years minimum, right? When they're elected, right? So they win a couple elections. They're there for a long time, 12 years, 18 years, etc. And so part of that is judges needed some authority in the law to do this, and so we got it done. And I can't tell you, I mean, we look at people like that, and they come back and they said, for the first time in my life, I have a way of reclaiming what was taken from me. And so, there's another one.
Again, changing lives by looking at what was the problem and making it right.
Right.
That's the way it needs to be done.
Well, I've had more fun in the last 4 years. I can't tell you. Tackling these issues, they are heavy, like emotionally draining issues.
Sure.
They're very tough to get done in the legislature because, you look at some people looked at the ABLE Act as an expansion of a social service, and I'm like, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's empowering families to do what they want to do but can't because the law prevents them from doing it. And so we empower families to take care of their loved ones. In this regard, it's like, oh, well, these people do this and they should know better. These people are trafficked. These
Right.
are folks that are under serious duress, and they're abused people, and they're threatened. Their very lives are threatened. And to say that and to think that way, we had to re-educate a bunch of people.
Changing
to
the
change
outlook
the
of
outlook
people's
of
yeah.
Absolutely. And so, but these are some things that we've accomplished in the last year that, in my view, I mean, we're looking at these systemic problems in the number one part of our economy, which is real estate, fixing those. We're seeing great results there already. We've given municipalities tools to combat vacancy and abandonment and blight. We're looking at cracking down right now on the land contract process that these big mega groups, when they buy these abandoned homes, use and try to stick people in them and abuse them. We're working on that right now to close that loophole to make sure that when you buy a house, you're fully informed on what you're getting and understanding it, so that you can't be taken advantage of by using a non-bank to buy a house. So, I mean, there's a lot of good work we're still working on, trying to get done. We've got some good relief going on right now for our smaller banks that are in our urban cores that are out in the country, focusing on the little guys.
Sure.
Because it's really hard for them to compete because in the hyper-regulated environment we're in. They are not supposed to have to do all the things that the federal government makes them do because they're not $10 billion and more in assets. Sometimes they're $30, $40 million, and they're small little banks.
Sure.
And they're not meant to be under the same rules. And some of this stuff needs to be cleaned up and organized, and everybody needs to get in their own lane. So we know what to expect for them. They know what to expect for themselves. Make them competitive, because right now they're leaving. They're leaving the urban cores. They're leaving the rural areas. I mean, across the country, since a lot of these federal laws went in place, 6,000 community banks and have gone under since, shuttered. And so when you need access to capital in these small areas, I mean, there are some rural areas where you have to drive a county or two to do a deposit. Right.
And you also have to remember that some of these, we keep thinking we're in this technological age and everything is high tech and this. Some of them may not even have an internet provider to be able to do so.
They don't.
So to do an electronic deposit where you and I can think that's simple and easy, that's a Saturday afternoon, to them it's we have to plan a day.
Plan a whole day. And so if you're a business that, think about it, so out in the country and even here, there's a lot of teachers that they have summer businesses, like a corner ice cream store or whatever, like a Dairy Whip corner. And it's mainly cash. Most folks go in there,
point.
It's $1, $2 for an ice cream cone. And so now you've got to plan around your days to take a bunch of cash to various places. I mean, that's another problem. So, fixing that and working on common sense solutions where you can let community banks thrive and small credit unions thrive in those communities. That's what they're for. I mean, credit unions and small community banks are supposed to be in our urban core, and they're supposed to be in the country. They're supposed to serve those that need access to capital the most. And so we're working on cleaning that up and fixing that to give them the ability to go invest in those communities again.
Are you fearful, and just by listening, it sounds that, and you can clarify this, it sounds like in a way that they may shudder and something could fall. And if that happens, how does that affect what Ohio really is and not just the megapolises like we're in, but we're still farmland. One way or another you look at it, we still are the heart of the country.
Our number one driver is the agriculture.
Yes.
People forget that. They always think healthcare because there's a hospital
in every corner.
anymore.
Starbucks
and a doctor's office.
And a doctor's office.
Right, there's a doctor's office and a Starbucks. I don't know what that means, but that's. But agriculture is a driver.
We're not making light of this. No.
No. But I mean, agriculture is a main driver. And,
yes.
But the reality of it is, there was an interesting article in Wall Street Journal, and I don't recall when I read it, but basically the theme was there's a ward in Chicago where they don't have a lot of the violent crime that they're seeing in other wards.
Okay.
So the shootings and all that, they're not really seeing that. The community is engaged, they're self-policing, but they're a very poor neighborhood. And the journalist was asking the ward member, why is this? And he goes, we got credit. We have credit. And it's because there are people there investing in the community as lenders to make sure that the folks have access to capital, because when you have access to capital, that means you're borrowing and you're putting it in your house, you're putting it in your car, you're putting it into your life, you're putting it in your kids' education. And when you do that, you have some value associated with it, so you protect it.
Correct.
And so everybody's looking out for one another, and everybody's making sure. So one of the biggest issues that we have in poor areas is the access to capital and access to credit. When you take that away, it creates a problem. And so getting community banks and credit unions to re-engage those communities in a meaningful and impactful way, I think is very, very important, because then they can be banked, they have access to credit, they have access to loans, and they can borrow, and they can invest in their businesses, invest in themselves through education opportunities, et cetera, whatever they want to do. But having that presence, that physical presence of a credit union or a community bank, very, very important for folks across the country. We take it very much for granted. I mean, we could probably go in any direction right from here and probably run into 15 ATMs and several banks from where we are within a mile or two. But that's not the case in a lot of parts of the state, where transportation is a challenge,
Right.
Or where you have to go county to get to something. So, we're very fortunate being from a metropolitan area where we don't think about these things, but part of where I sit, I have to deal with these particular issues on a global scale, meaning all of Ohio,
Sure.
and then working with our federal partners to make sure that what they're doing doesn't impact negatively our Ohio economy. So it's an interesting challenge, an interesting dynamic.
And it's one of the things that we've talked about many times is that your seat and your area does encompass a little bit of everything that Ohio is. So it may not be 80% of what you're looking at, say, more towards that Appalachian area, Athens and east, but we may have a little bit of it when you go, to the little bit of the west of us.
True.
So,
Very true.
These items do affect our area somewhat. Definitely things we need to look towards and work on. Speaking of looking on and looking towards, we are running towards the end of our time here. What are some things that you're looking for? Obviously, we do know that the election is coming up, so that's one thing that is probably weighing heavy on your mind. However, the end of the session is coming up as well, so we do have to close the books somehow.
Right. I'm focused on obviously both, but I'm really focusing on the legislative work that's ahead of us right now. The elections are elections; they happen every year. So, but really, the work that's at hand is really important. I'm really working on finishing up that credit piece that we're talking about, trying to make sure we've got access to capital in our urban cores and our rural areas. To me, that's a huge priority. Another thing that we're experimenting with and looking at is using or giving permissive authority for blockchain use at the municipal level. I think they can do it already, but encouraging them to consider it. We're seeing the use of blockchain in municipal bonding across the country, and that's resulting is not only a higher yield but lower cost. In some areas, they're seeing 40% reduction in the cost of the bond, which means that there's that much more money available for the actual project. When you lose up to 40% between middlemen and bond brokers and Wall Street and everything else, that's a lot of money that disappears that the taxpayers still have to pay back. So finding a way to take advantage of the blockchain technology with the municipal bond is something that we're trying to work on in the same bill. Put that in there and give these municipalities around here across the state the power and the authority without worrying about whether or not they have it in statute. So it's permissive, but they can do it, and there are some states and some cities that are already doing it and experimenting with it. And from my understanding, if you needed the $2.4 billion for our bridge down here, you could raise that in 72 hours with this approach. So fascinating concepts.
Wow, that is
fascinating approach to dealing with infrastructure. So as we move forward into trying to digest this technology, those are some things that we're trying to get done in the final days of the General Assembly. And then, of course, I still have some other bills that I'd like to see get done.
Absolutely.
We've gotten 4 done so far this year, 24 amendments, 22 were accepted in the budget, and a lot of other bills that I handed off to other members that are law that I helped work through. There's only so many. There's only one of me, so I have to work with other folks.
I understand that completely.
So, we've had a really good run this year. We had a really good run last General Assembly, too. So I think when we close the books on this, a lot of the things that we've talked about here are going to be done. The one thing I love coming in here to do is say what I've done, what we're trying to do, and what we get done. The one piece that I'd love to get done, though, we talked about I'm still trying to work with the chairman. He doesn't know what he wants to do, but General Stivers is fully supportive of it, so I'm really happy about it. If you recall, we talked about the sending a resolution off to the Department of Defense to allow people with disabilities to serve if they so chose in our National Guard.
Yes,
and
I do
so
remember
that
this piece,
resolution
yes.
is still in the Armed Services Committee. So we have had a hard time convincing the chairman that it's something we should be doing. The general, our General Stivers, loves it. Would love to see it happen. So if anybody has an extra few seconds, please call the chairman, Chairman Johnson, at his office in Columbus, and encourage him to pass the resolution out of committee so we can get that to the floor. That's all we need to do is get it on the floor, and we can send it off to Congress. It's more of a statement than it is a policy thing, but I personally believe as Ohioans, there are a lot of highly talented people with disabilities that can provide a lot of service to our national security and to our state if they would just allow them to be able to work.
And we talked about that one, that, just because, they're not out in the trenches, they're out working to protect and serve, and that's all they really want to do.
Right, thank you.
All right. Well, like I said, we've reached the bottom of the hour here. Representative Deaver, I want to thank you for taking your time to come out here and give us all the information that's going on in our district.
Always, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank you as well. You have been watching the Columbus Report here on Waycross Community Media. Be sure to get involved. 825-2429, that's our number here. You can get involved, create programming just like this, and enjoy the time that you have being able to speak your mind. Again, I'm Jason Gusgorek, your host, and we look forward to seeing you.